Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show. People across the country are heading to the polls on September the 20th to vote in the 2021 federal election. But how accessible will that process be for Canadians who are blind and partially sighted? Joining me now to express some of the accessibility concerns is Duane Morgan, Executive Director of CNIB in Newfoundland and Labrador, as well as New Brunswick. Duane is also a regular consultant with Election Canada's Advisory Group for Disability Issues. Hey, Duane, welcome to the show. Nice to chat with you once again.
Oh, hey, Dave. It's just saying to your producer, it's like old friends meeting up again. Great to be here with you again.
Well, we're so glad you could join us. And Duane, let's start with a little bit of a history lesson, because the CNIB's advocacy effort dates all the way back to the 1930s. Can you give us an idea of what the history has been for blind voters in this country?
Yeah, it's been, as you said, I mean, we've been advocating for since the 1930s for accessibility, and really, I mean, a lot of the challenges remain the same. The fact that we continue to use that, lead pencil and paper as the primary means of voting remains a challenge. And even though there's been, changes, and I mean, we can commend Elections Canada for some of the changes they've made. And certainly when we look at the implementation of, things like Braille templates for ballots at the polling stations, and large print and Braille versions of the candidate lists at the voting stations, along with tools like magnifiers, have been a good step forward. But the fact that lead pencil and paper as a primary means of voting is a challenge, especially for those people that are blind or with very low vision.
So Duane, let's kind of zoom out a little bit here and discuss sort of the overall concept and concern about what it is to have the right to vote and what that means for all Canadians, and especially those who are blind and partially sighted.
I think the key thing, I mean, we all have that right to vote, and I guess the extension of that is that we have the right to vote independently, and certainly that's impeded when we have to have assistance to do those things. When we head to the polls this September, everybody's predicting that due to the pandemic, there'll be a higher volume than usual of those people seeking to use mail-in ballots, and they're estimating in excess of 4 million Canadians will use that as their means of voting, by mail-in ballot. And I know from seeing what that's going to be, that's not something that I can use. For example, it'll be a paper ballot, which the font would be not what we would call large, and certainly wouldn't be in an altered format. So that's not something that I can use. So you look at 1.5 million Canadians who are blind or partially sighted, that's not really an option for them to be able to vote independently, because they would need assistance with that. And while some are comfortable with that, there are many that wouldn't be comfortable with having assistance because they want to keep their vote private. And so I think that's the key piece, is that we have the right to vote, but we also have that right to vote independently. And that's certainly been a barrier for people who are blind and partially sighted throughout the history of our country.
Yeah, I think that's the big underlining concept there, right? It's that it's independence, especially something that we consider it to be one of our rights, one of our privileges, to be able to vote and vote for who we want to without somebody else necessarily having to see that or knowing that, right? Or somebody getting to mark that X for us, or trusting that they're even going to mark the X in the right place, right? It becomes all these elements of trust that are so important and sort of a bedmark in our democracy. Duane, you mentioned it a little bit before, but let's talk about some of the improvements and some of the commendments that do deserve to be given to Elections Canada here in regards to a few improvements they've made in previous elections when it comes to accessibility.
Well, I mean, as we've touched on, I mean, if you're going to a polling station, there are, the Braille templates and large print and Braille versions of the candidate list. There's magnifiers on hand to help out as well. And even in the past, in the 2019 election, that you were allowed to use your smartphone as long as you were using something on there that availed of artificial intelligence, and it wasn't connecting with someone else on the other end. So you weren't, FaceTiming in the booth or any of those things. As long as you were using something that was really technically like an aid to you, then you were allowed to use that. A lot of people, I guess, didn't avail of that because there wasn't a lot of policies and procedures put around it. A lot of I guess, misunderstanding or misinformation or lack of information on using that. And then, of course, there's there's a large number of our population, perhaps seniors that might not be using a smartphone, for
Mm,
example, to vote, and so probably didn't avail of that. And we know that changes every day as we work to get technology to the hands of people that are blind or partially sighted, and teach them how to use that. So those things are available at the polling stations, and even during these elections, we've been working with Elections Canada to that prep material, that information guides and all those things, and even the new attachment to that they've developed around people's health and safety when voting, especially when it comes to the pandemic and COVID-19 measures. We've worked to produce Braille copies of that, audio copies of that have been mailed out and distributed, or
mm.
continue to be mailed out and distributed, I should say. So those things have been in place. But I mean, in other elections, and like provincial elections and municipalities, we've seen great strides in looking at things a little different that the federal government hasn't looked at. Things like telephone-based voting. We've seen in municipal and provincial elections the use of electronic audio tabulators in a polling station. I'm not sure, Dave, if you've seen those, but that's been an option with an audio jack that you can listen to what's happening there and guide you through the process.
Mm.
And certainly with this being the digital age that we're living in, I can't help but think that there must be some sort of solution out there that would still keep people's privacy in mind and make sure that the that vote is valid moving forward. There's so many possibilities out there that I think we need to just push for our federal government to start thinking just a little bit differently and work with us and take recommendations from our community and make those changes.
Yeah, if something that I said a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about this on the news panel is if we can bank online, I don't see why we can't vote online. If we can protect our money in these online spheres, why can't we protect our democracy in these spheres as well? Duane, I want to back up to something you said there because I think it's really interesting. You mentioned that there were certain policies in place, right, to potentially use some artificial intelligence or use some aids like that in the booth, but then there was maybe still confusion at the polling station as well. Mm-hmm. So it's one of these reminders about policy and procedure is great, but you need to make sure that the people on the ground have that communicated to. And in the case of a lot of poll clerks or DROs, direct return operatives, that these individuals are kind of brought in piecemeal, right? They're not necessarily Elections Canada full-time employees. They're working for a day or two, but it just seems really important that in an onboarding process, in like the 1 hour training session, it's even just a couple of sentences. Hey, here are the accessibility concerns, and here is what's allowed. And it's sort of quickly and easily available on like one PowerPoint.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, those, polling officers and people working in the polling stations and even people assisting perhaps from campaign offices or whatever that is, they do have, that initial training and some information. And I think it's great for them to be able to avail of that, as you said, maybe in a quick format that they can look up. But I think it's us as Canadians with sight loss, we need to take some of that responsibility ourselves and seek out that information. And as I said, there is information being distributed, but also CNIB worked with Elections Canada in 2019 and again this time around to offer information sessions about what's available for voting day and leading up to that, whether it's advanced polls and what's available for accommodations, and what's allowed and what's not allowed. And certainly during those sessions, there's an opportunity to ask questions. And if those answers are not there, we can help seek out those answers to get to you. So I encourage, Canadians who are blind and partially sighted to seek out those opportunities to learn things for themselves so that they know what's available and know what they have the right to ask for.
Yeah, something that I've always said a lot. One of the keys to advocacy is knowing what you're advocating for. So knowing either the specific rule itself or maybe the page number or the proper terminology can oftentimes be very, very helpful. Duane, is there a spot where people can go to learn more about the CNIB's efforts along with Elections Canada to make some of these resources available and learn more? Is there a spot where folks can go?
Yeah, there is. Funny, we mentioned, we've been doing this since the 30s. So you can visit cnib.ca/90 years to find out more about the goings on there.
cnib.ca/90 years. I like that. That's good.
Yeah.
It shows the effort, the ongoing effort that we're always talking about here. Sometimes it's a bit of a spectrum. Hey, Duane, it's been so great catching up with you again. Thank you for making time to be with us today. All the best to you and your colleagues out there, and hopefully we get a chance to touch base again sometime soon.
Well, thanks, Dave. And this is the 44th election. Let's make 45 the magic number that brings forth the best in accommodations and accessibility.
I like that. That's a message that we can get behind through and through. That's Duane Morgan. He's the executive director of the CNIB in Newfoundland and Labrador, as well as New Brunswick. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen.